All right, so it's been about a year and 9 months since Donald Trump has taken office as the President of the United States. Now, what I want to do is do a bit of a deep dive into Jimmy Dore's ideas of what was going to happen with the Trump presidency. Now, I have to start this out by saying that I'm not a hater of Jimmy Dore. This is just an objective analysis of what he said and what actually ended up turning out. And I want to say for you guys who are watching, if you're a Jimmy Dore hater, just put that aside. If you're a Jimmy Dore big time fan, also put that to the side. Let's try to just look at this objectively speaking because this is one of the issues where we're dealing with facts and it's not actually debatable. So I'm going to show you guys some of the clips of the things that Jimmy Dore said prior, and we're going to look at what actually ended up occurring. So in this first clip, what I'm going to be showing you guys is it's going to be Sam Seder and Jimmy Dore arguing about the Supreme Court of the United States.
But we had this debate, and to watch this, it really is upsetting to me. Because
now let me just say, your point about the Supreme Court. My position on the Supreme Court is that right now, like you said, he's not your first choice. I'm with you on that. I'll just say this: right now, the Republicans aren't even giving a guy who they called a perfect choice. Right? They loved him. Right? Orrin Hatch said he'd be the best choice, and then they won't even give him a hearing or a meeting. Without batting an eye for a year. This is the argument we had before. So why wouldn't the Democrats, let's say if Donald Trump nominates a maniac, why wouldn't they say, no, why don't you nominate Merrick Garland?
Well, Jimmy, this was the next thing I was going to get to. I understand. You're saying, why can't the Democrats do this?
Right.
You said on the tape here that the Republicans are filibustering. They're not filibustering.
No, they're not filibustering. That was you correct. You corrected
the Democrats.
They're not.
The Democrats. There is no one who has ever even speculated that it's possible for Donald Trump to win the presidency and for the Democrats to take back the Senate. Those two things cannot happen. And so the Democrats don't have the ability to not provide a hearing for Donald Trump's nominee. There's no way the Republicans are going to go 4 years without a hearing on. They can maybe get away with this with Obama, and they can play out the clock for 6 or 7 months because there's a huge presidential election going on, so the media has been distracted somewhat. But I can tell you that in January, there's only going to be one story. Maybe there'll be two. One will be how, if Hillary Clinton's the president, one will be how the Republicans are threatening to shut down the government again. And the other one will be they're refusing to hold hearings for her nominee. And that will just go on because there's not going to be anything else that's going on. It's going to be a fundamentally different media era. So I don't think they're going to be able to hold out for 4 years. And Democrats certainly wouldn't be able to hold out for 4 years because they don't believe in the destruction of the Senate as an institution in the way that Republicans do. And frankly, I'm glad about that.
Okay, so you don't. So here's my theory. I'll just give you my theory: is that if the Republicans can do this to a guy like Merrick Garland, that they've already said is a great justice, for a whole year without batting an eye and paying no political price for it, I say the Democrats will be able to filibuster someone that Donald Trump nominated, and then in 2 years, the Senate, in my opinion, it would flip to Republican, just because of. I agree with Chris Hayes when he says that if Donald Trump becomes president, it's the destruction of the Republican Party, and Paul Ryan is not going to usher any of his crazy policies through Congress. So they fracture, and the Senate flips to Democrat. They were saying it was almost going to happen this year.
But but you know the difference between, Jimmy, surely you know the difference between how many Senate Republicans are running for re-election this year versus 2 years from now, right? You know the difference, right? We have 2/3 of the race is our Senate's Republicans up for a race, and in 2 years we have 2 times the number of Democrats who are up for re-election. So
Right.
the idea of the Democrats taking back the Senate in 2018 is an extreme long shot. The idea that Paul Ryan may not pursue any of Donald Trump's crazy legislation, but he will pursue Paul Ryan's crazy legislation, and Donald Trump will surely sign it. Why wouldn't he?
Okay, so
you're going to let Paul Ryan, would you
Court.
want Paul Ryan to be president? This guy wants to privatize Medicare. He wants to privatize Social Security. He wants to cut any type of social safety net. He wants to get rid of the estate taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, why is his agenda any better than Donald Trump's? Even if you believe Donald Trump is not even going to do anything except for sign legislation, that's bad enough.
Yeah, Sam, we're on the same side most things. I'll just disagree with
Jimmy,
you.
no, wait a second. No, we're not. Because
politically, except for Hillary Clinton in the Supreme Court, we disagree 100% on that. And I think that if Donald Trump is president, it's way worse for the Republicans. And if Hillary Clinton is, I agree with Chris Hayes when he says Hillary Clinton is good for the Republican Party and Donald Trump is bad for it. I agree with him.
I agree with that too. But in the meantime, we have a Supreme Court that is going to be moved to the right for generations.
So
In the
I disagree
meantime,
with you on that. I mean, you haven't given me an argument that rebuts what I said, that the Democrats could easily filibuster any bad appointee, and they could say, hey, until you give us someone as good as Merrick Garland, we're going to keep filibustering this. And all we have to do is do it for 2 years. And my proof that they could do it is that the Republicans are doing it to a guy like Merrick Garland, who they already said they like, without batting an eye for a year. So I just disagree with you on this, Sam, on the Supreme Court. I just disagree.
And what about when Justice Breyer or Justice Ginsburg pass away or retire?
Yeah, I mean,
so they're going to filibuster. They're going to prevent 2 vacancies from being filled, and then you think based on that in the context of American society as you know it, without a presidential election going on, that the Democrats are going to retake the Senate, even though they have twice as many people up for re-election.
So essentially what Sam Seder and Jimmy Dore were arguing about in that clip that you just saw was that basically during this next presidency, there are going to be multiple vacancies within the Supreme Court, and obviously the president is the one who appoints the Supreme Court. Now the Senate has to confirm, but basically what happened is Sam Seder was saying, hey, if you let Donald Trump take office, he's going to be able to appoint potentially multiple Supreme Court justices because of the way that everything was looking. Well, obviously there was already one vacancy with Scalia, who died, but then there was also potential for other vacancies. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was getting old, and a lot of those people are geezers who are on the Supreme Court. So what Jimmy Dore was saying is that it does, will be okay because if Donald Trump takes office, he said there's a chance that the Senate will be won by the Democrats in that specific midterm in that election year. But it turned out to be the case that the Democrats did not end up winning the Senate. And he said that there was just a chance of that. He actually wasn't claiming that they were going to win. That wasn't the crux of his argument. What he was saying is that they can filibuster. Now, if you filibuster, essentially means you need 60 votes for cloture. Because normally you would just need a majority, right? Or even 50-50 that's if you have the vice president in your party. But they wouldn't have that. So, the majority, you'd just have to get a majority vote. But if you filibuster, it requires 60 votes. Now, the thing that Jimmy didn't bank on, first of all, was that the Republicans would change the rules to, instead of having an actual filibuster require 60 votes, they changed it to just be a majority number. So the Republicans in the Senate just straight up changed the rules, and I guess that thought didn't come to mind. It did not. It was not something that was calculated in that calculation. But more importantly, I want to highlight the idea that the Democrats could or would be able to or do a filibuster for not just 2 years, but 4 years. Because if Donald Trump is president, he only get the chance to reelect, in 4 years. So what he's saying is the Democrats can filibuster for not just 2 years, but 4 years. Or in 2 years, they'd be able to get the Senate back, which in and of itself, we don't know. We're coming around the midterm election, so we still don't know how that's going to turn out. But it's hard to say the least, because there are, I believe it's 26 Senate Democrats running for re-election. I think there's like 9 Republicans. So obviously the amount of vacancies is extremely lopsided. And on top of that, there's a bunch of vulnerable Democrats in the Senate too, like Joe Manchin, who's in West Virginia. But anyways, the idea that the Democrats would have been able to actually filibuster for 2 years or 4 years is pure insanity, okay, for 2 reasons. One of them being, we know that the Democrats are not that, they aren't like that. That's not within the DNA and the blood makeup. They don't have that Mamba mentality. Like, they're pushovers, you know what I mean? Like, that's what, the Democrats are pushovers. And they don't have that sort of build like the Republicans do in Congress, where the Republicans are totally cool with being savage, we're going to block this shit for like 8 months or however long it was, basically the entire final year of Obama's presidency. The Democrats don't have that, A, but B, the idea that, I guess there's 3 reasons actually, B being that the idea that the overall environment of the nation would allow for a situation in which there's a 2-year or 4-year filibuster is insanity. The idea that they wouldn't face any blowback for that and any like crazy protest and media fucking, criticism and stuff like that, insanity. Pure insanity. There's no way the Democrats would have been able to pull off a 2 or 4 year filibuster without massive backlash that would surely incur damage upon the Democratic Party. It's insane to even think that would be possible to do by a party. So A being they're weak, they're pushovers, and Jimmy knows that. B being there's no way that it's inconceivable. A 2 to 4 year actual filibuster it's insane. That's a crazy talk. It's unheard of. And C being he never calculated, I mean, this is another thing, but C, he didn't calculate that there would be Democrats who are actually dinos, Democrats in name only, like Joe Manchin, who he just voted, I believe he voted for Gorsuch as well, but he just voted for Brett Kavanaugh. So he also didn't actually control that factor either, that there would be dinos as well. So he didn't think of that either. And again, to reiterate, he did not ever factor in that there would be the possibility of the Republicans just switching the rules, because the Republicans were able to get it with 51 votes. So they didn't need, there was no, filibuster. But, it is just very, very clear that the predictions of Jimmy Dore that the Democrats would filibuster and that they would really have the opportunity to do so were dead wrong.
When he says that if Donald Trump becomes president, it's the destruction of the Republican Party, and Paul Ryan is not going to usher any of his crazy policies through Congress. So
2018 is an extreme long shot. The idea that Paul Ryan may not pursue any of Donald Trump's crazy legislation, but he will pursue Paul Ryan's crazy legislation, and Donald Trump will surely sign it. Why wouldn't he?
Okay, so
you're going to let Paul Ryan, would you want Paul Ryan to be president? This guy wants to privatize Medicare. He wants to privatize Social Security. He wants to cut any type of social safety net. He wants to get rid of the estate taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, why is his agenda any better than Donald Trump's? Even if you believe Donald Trump is not even going to do anything except for sign legislation, that's bad enough.
So there was also a tidbit in that clip that I wanted to speak about. They also talked about Paul Ryan, and basically Jimmy was making the argument that Donald Trump won't actually be able to get anything through, and because Paul Ryan's not going to do anything that Donald Trump wants. This was one of the, worst calculations possible, because it predicted pretty much, I don't know if you want to call it the unpredictable, but basically the idea behind it was, Paul Ryan and Donald Trump are polar opposites on the scale of politics, right? The idea was Paul Ryan and Donald Trump, pretty much complete opposites. They're not really the same. But what ended up turning out to be the case is Donald Trump pretty much did everything that Paul Ryan, wanted. I mean, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they agreed on. The repeal of Obamacare came insanely close. It's unbelievable how close it was to us and the individual mandate is gone, by the way. That's gone. But the Obamacare repeal became super, super, super close to going away. So it's like on all of those issues, remember when he destroyed the Iran deal? He took a sledgehammer and just freaking castrated that shit. He absolutely saw pretty much eye to eye with Paul Ryan, except for the things of basically the mean tweets. You know what I mean? It's like the conservatives agreed with him on everything except for Donald Trump's douchiness. That's pretty much the only disagreement that came in. So there was a miscalculation on the part of Jimmy Dore that, if Donald Trump becomes president, there's going to be a major disconnect, and it's going to cause this major, dividing line, right? There's going to be a big, just versus going on, and they're going to hate each other, and there's going to be basically paralysis, essentially legislative paralysis, because Donald Trump's legislation is going to be way too crazy, and Paul Ryan's not going to agree with it, and so he's not going to pursue it. But the truth ended up being, and what the outcome ended up being, was that actually they pretty much saw eye to eye. The Obamacare repeal, which got nearly passed, the Iran deal being destroyed. We saw Israel-Palestine talks get completely destroyed because of what he did. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. The most important thing, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, like they saw eye to eye on pretty much everything except for him being a douchebag. That's pretty much it. And anything that was really in opposition during the campaign turned out to be a complete lie. It turned out that Donald Trump doesn't actually care at all about any of those things that he claimed to care about. And so they ended up seeing eye to eye. This was possibly one of the worst predictions by Jimmy Dore, because this is right up there with the Supreme Court, because we now have two new conservatives on the Supreme Court, which makes it a massive, massive conservative court, and we could be headed for another Lochner era. Now, it's never going to be as bad as the Lochner era. It's impossible, but it'll be as close to the Lochner era as possible. But Jimmy Dore was 100% wrong in the idea that there's going to be this rife within the Republican Party and they're going to have legislative paralysis, when in reality, the Democrats are now in attempt trying to push away everything, and they're unable to do so because the filibuster rule got changed for only 50 votes needed for cloture rather than 60. So they're left essentially with nothing but having to have Republicans flip, which doesn't always end up happening, as we saw with Brett Kavanaugh.
In this assessment too, right?
No,
because let me just get this clear. Because the Democrats are going to filibuster for 2 years, then the Democrats are going to take over the Senate, and then they're going to continue to filibuster for another 2 years. And because of the collapse of the Republican Party, we're going to get a Democrat that you can support. Who might that be? Do you have an idea 4 years out who the Democrat you're going to support for president is? Or is it going to be Jill Stein?
Sure, I like Elizabeth Warren.
Okay, so you think Elizabeth Warren is going to run 4 years, and she's going to get elected, and then everything's going to be fine. That's the plan?
Sam, my plan is to filibuster any bad nominees that Donald Trump nominates, and we come to a compromise. Hey,
so
Merrick
you
Garland,
think the
our
Democrats
compromise.
can maintain a filibuster over the course of those 4 years if there's 2 vacancies or 3 vacancies?
Yeah, you think that Donald Trump can keep nominating maniacs to the Supreme Court who isn't a compromised judge? Why can't we force him to nominate a compromised judge? Why wouldn't we put the pressure on him? By the way, you act like
I would
there
just
won't be
say
scandals.
Thomas,
There will be constant
Alito,
scandals,
Roberts.
constant scandals surrounding Donald Trump. He will be the most ineffective president. This whole idea that somehow he will be equal standing when he nominates someone to the Supreme Court is ridiculous. They're gonna rip him a new one every time he does something. He will be over scrutinized. Hillary won't be as scrutinized. He will be the most ineffective president. This whole idea that somehow he will be equal standing when he nominates someone to the Supreme Court is ridiculous.
Holy guacamole. There cannot be a better phrase than holy guacamole to describe how insanely wrong Jimmy was, just based off of that one quote of him saying that Trump will be the most ineffective president ever. I want you to just, oh my God, that was so wrong. Donald Trump, the most ineffective president, he has done horrible things that have incurred damage that will persist for, I'm not exaggerating, legitimately, quite literally decades from now. Literally decades. We're talking about, first of all, the Supreme Court, right? There was already one vacancy with Scalia. Gets filled by Neil Gorsuch. Horrible person, by the way. Neil Gorsuch, horrible person. There was a case that when he was a lower court judge, there was a case where there was a worker who I think was a trucker or something like that. He was working and it was really snowy, and if he didn't leave, he was gonna die of hypothermia. And the people who were his bosses essentially said no, you have to stay there. So he had to gamble with, okay, either I lose my job or my life. Like, that's kind of crazy, right? And Neil Gorsuch sided with the company. Oh my God. And Neil Gorsuch has insane ties to neoconservatism. It's crazy. He gets appointed. Mind you, this dude is like, I forget exactly how old he is, but he's young when it comes to speaking about Supreme Court justices. Supreme Court justices most of the time leave once they're effectively damn near incapacitated. And they're like their 80s and sometimes 90s. It's insane how old these geezers are on the Supreme Court. And then there's a second vacancy that gets filled by somebody even worse than Neil Gorsuch. Legitimately someone even worse than Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh. Because first of all, Brett Kavanaugh is somebody he's just a crappy human being, first of all. But second of all, there was actually a recent case where Neil Gorsuch, at least there's some sort of consistency or something. I want to give him credit for something. I don't know how exactly to word it, but Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh got into a disagreement on the Supreme Court because Neil Gorsuch was essentially stating that the government having this power was just too much. And Brett Kavanaugh said, no, this power is clearly okay and it's fine for the Trump administration. So Brett Kavanaugh is worse because what he's going to do is just full-throated support for Donald Trump. The reason why he was appointed was obviously because Brett Kavanaugh said that the president should not be impeached and removed from office because it's just too distracting and the president of the United States has to focus on a lot of things. And obviously he's contradictory because he helped Ken Starr in attempting to impeach Bill Clinton. So we know that. So what does that mean? 2 Supreme Court justices, this now results in a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. Now, what is the issue with that? You say, well, first of all, these people serve on the court for life. These are life-serving judges. Neil Gorsuch, fairly young. In relativity to the Supreme Court, he's not like 25, right? I'm talking about Supreme Court level, right? If you're like 60, you're young on the Supreme Court because that means you got like 20, 30 potential years to serve, which is an insane amount of time, by the way. So if you recall, Obamacare damn near got struck down. I can't remember if it was, I think it was Roberts who was the swing vote. Someone can correct me. I don't remember if it was Anthony or if it was Roberts or Judge Kennedy or Roberts, but one of them basically flipped pretty much last second and decided to uphold it. Now, there were certain parts of that got struck down anyways, like the Obama administration wanted to say if Republican governors reject the Medicaid expansion, then we strip all your funding for Medicaid and you're on your own. That the Supreme Court took that down. But basically, the Supreme Court said that this is within the enumerated powers of the federal government, because one of the enumerated powers of the federal government is to lay and collect taxes. And so what they said is their rationality of it was that the government was placing a tax on people who did not have health insurance. And so what I'm trying to get at here is Obamacare was damn near repealed. If a Medicare for all gets passed by President Bernie Sanders or President whoever progressive, right, and it goes up to the Supreme Court, because trust me, it will. Landmark legislation like that always hits the courts multiple times, by the way. It's going to go through the appellate system and eventually it'll get to the Supreme Court. When it gets to the Supreme Court, it's getting shut down. It's getting shut down because there's a majority conservative court. So how can you even bank on this idea of having, this next 4 years having a president in, and then you get the legislation that you want passed through the legislative body of the United States, which is Congress, and it is actually signed by the executive, which is obviously the president, but then it goes to the judicial system and they strike it down. Well, what the hell was the point of all of getting Bernie Sanders or whoever progressive elected and a Democratic bicameral freaking body? Like, there's no point. Supreme Court is way more important than people understand. And the Supreme Court is more of a political junkie type of thing. Like, I think there was some insane stat of like some insane percentage of the population can't even name a single Supreme Court justice. So it's like the Supreme Court is nowhere near as glorified as Congress or the president. So it doesn't, like, people don't pay attention to. People don't know that much about it, frankly. Like, I don't even know if Jimmy Dore is aware of the Obamacare Supreme Court ruling. For me personally, I find probably the most interesting thing in politics is to read Supreme Court cases. But anyway, aside from that, the idea that Trump was ineffective when he broke the Iran deal, which has destroyed our image internationally speaking. It has absolutely destroyed our relations with Iran, and he pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, which is horrible. They're not doing this crazy crap about climate change. They're destroying the EPA. They're doing crazy amounts of things. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Our deficit is ballooning as I'm speaking right now. The deficit's ballooning to right now like record numbers. So the deficit is ballooning because of Donald Trump. There are so many things that have happened under Donald Trump that it's hard to keep count and keep track of. And so the idea, and I have to reiterate this, that Donald Trump was an ineffective president is a very incorrect claim. Jimmy Dore was flat out incorrect about that claim. And once again, he says that the Democrats would be able to filibuster not only Supreme Court justice nominees, but additionally obstruct crappy legislation that's proposed by Republicans. Again, the miscalculation error comes in when you don't factor in that the Republicans can go nuclear and change the rules from cloture needing 60 votes to get out of debate to, cloture only needs 50 votes, and so you've got 51 Republicans, so you can vote out of filibusters because the filibuster rule to end a filibuster is only 50 votes. So he didn't actually put that in, so the Democrats can't filibuster, garbage. They can't filibuster anything. They can't filibuster a damn thing. They are filibusterless. They are unable to do so completely. So that turned out to be a trillion gazillion percent wrong. And to add to that, he also did not actually factor in that there are dinos. What are dinos? As I explained earlier, Democrats in name only. Joe Manchin voting for both Neil Gorsuch and voting for Brett Kavanaugh. That's insane. So he miscalculated on so many grounds. It's hard to keep track and to actually keep count of.
Donald Trump is an incompetent, and he will have extra scrutiny, and he won't be able to get any of the horrible stuff done that people think he. This is my theory.
All right, so as you guys just saw, he made that statement on the Young Turks. He was doing like this sort of debate with this guy named Wes Clark on TYT, and his theory is basically what we just went over. So I wanted to reiterate that this was essentially Jimmy Dore's overarching idea of what would happen if Trump becomes president. The idea behind Trump becoming president for Jimmy was it's just essentially going to result in a very ineffective presidency. The Democrats will be able to filibuster, and that it will make the left-wing movement unified and stronger. First of all, the left wing did not end up actually being unified. And so what we're talking about here is the idea that Trump would be ineffective and didn't do any damage was, in conclusion, objectively, factually incorrect. And this is not a debatable issue. So essentially, the entirety of this video, the purpose was to analyze what Jimmy Dore was saying about a Trump presidency and whether or not his predictions and analysis was correct. Now, there's only one conclusion to come to upon listening to the theory that he just stated. He was wrong, because the effectiveness of Trump was very effective. He appointed 2 crazy right-wing Supreme Court justices to the Supreme Court. He got the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed. He destroyed the Iran deal, pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. The list just goes on and on. The Obamacare repeal, again, the individual mandate got repealed, which is horrible for Obamacare, because repealing the individual mandate is going to raise premiums on people. And they were scary close. I repeat the phrase, scary close to repealing Obamacare. So I want to just outro this video with whether or not you're Jimmy, I'm not against Jimmy Dore 100%. I think some things he's right on, some things he's wrong on. But in this case, at what we were specifically looking at, whether or not Jimmy Dore was correct, he was completely incorrect.